right now, is it?
Yes,
Yes.
very,
Okay,
very
thank
professional, Rosemary.
How bizarre.
Who are we waiting for? Just Gail, is it?
No,
Looks like
Councillor submitted
Edward.
apologies.
I'm subbing in for Gail.
Oh, are you? Okay.
Someone rang me up today to tell me that I wasn't coming to this meeting.
Yeah, that was
The win.
I misunderstood
Oh,
when
was that you, Emma? All right.
yeah, hello. I misunderstood the chairman's phone call, and yeah, so apologies for that. Councillor McCartney is standing in for Councillor Waller, who sends her apologies.
Just Edward then.
Yeah. Well, Andrew did crash a meeting last week.
Yes.
Oh, I did, didn't I? Yeah.
That he thought he was on, but he wasn't. So it's within character.
It's a good job someone said how many people are on this committee.
That's a symptom of your life, Andrew. You do too many meetings.
I do, yeah. Yeah, I'm addicted to Zoom, you see.
Losing your grip.
I thought there was an evening where I didn't have a Zoom meeting. I thought I must go and join one.
Well, I actually make it 7 o'clock now. We haven't got Edward, but I think we better make a start.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Financial Audit and Risk Committee, everybody. Welcome to our external auditors too. Please may I remind you to mute unless you're addressing an item and raise your virtual hands if you wish to speak at any point during the meeting. Emma Dursley, welcome Emma, will be from Governance, will help to administer the meeting and will take recorded votes when required. Item 1 on the agenda is apologies. I have apologies from Councillor Woodley, who's working at the moment, and also Councillor Waller, who's being substituted by Councillor McCartney. Are there any other apologies, Governance?
Not that I've received.
Okay, thank you. Item 2 is the minutes, to confirm the minutes of the Audit and Risk Committee held on the 10th of November 2020. If you're in agreement with them, do I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Councillor Rizal and Councillor Powell.
Thank you.
And Emma, could you take a vote, please?
Unless it's unanimous, if I get a nod of hands, I can take one by one, but if I just get a hand, I'll take that as a unanimous.
Hands?
No, Gordon Brown.
No, Councillor Brown's not a committee member.
Oh, sorry. So
I
yeah.
wasn't present at the last meeting, so I can't vote either.
No, all the committee members have voted.
Okay, so that's
Okay.
fine. I think that's unanimous, other than Councillor McCartney. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Item 3 is declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest, members of the committee, please? No. 4 is petitions, deputations and questions. I'm informed that there aren't any. Question 5 is questions with notice from members. None have been received. And 6, again, notice of motion. Again, there aren't any. Which brings us neatly on to item 7, which is the internal audit progress report, which Rachel's going to lead on. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So this is the latest update on the delivery of the current year's internal audit plan and other work that the internal audit team's been working on since the last committee meeting. So Appendix 1 is the usual format for the progress report. Since the last meeting, we have finalised our work this year on the follow-up of the highways contract management work. So I know the committee were keen to receive an update on this, so I'm glad to be able to bring the final report to you this evening. I did have discussions with the chair in advance of this meeting as well in terms of how we approach the audit work. So as it stands, we have been able to give a full update on the status of all of the actions that were arising from that audit. Because some of the controls are so newly implemented, I didn't feel that there was sufficient basis there for us to be able to give a revised audit opinion as at this point. So what I've recommended is that we've given you a full position statement as at the time of this testing, which is a comprehensive update provided to all of the committee members. But what we haven't done is issued a revised audit opinion. So what I propose is that we do a full audit in the next financial year when these controls are embedded, and there's more for us to be able to sample test, for example, and give you a reliable opinion on the effectiveness of those controls in practice. So I think it's a positive report. It's an update, obviously, on the progress that's been made and a high proportion of the actions that are now complete. I am reassured as well that those outstanding actions are now in hand, and we do have some new staff in place who will be able to progress that effectively as well. So we will continue to support the service area in progressing those actions and following that up. And as I said, I suggest that we revisit this in the next financial year and give you a new opinion that I'll bring back to the committee. Otherwise, we've also updated within the report on some of the other work that the internal audit team have been supporting on. Some of the audits that we have tried to progress have taken a little bit longer to get underway, or we're not able to get them underway at the moment. So I've mentioned the asset management audit. It has been agreed that we would postpone that audit to the next financial year. Again, this has been approved with the delegations that were approved at the start of the year for the Section 151 officer and the chair of the committee. But I obviously wanted to share that with committee members this evening. So the basis for that is that the property team who we would be dealing with for an asset management audit have been so heavily involved in setting up the vaccination centre and everything that's been happening on site that it hasn't been a suitable time to conduct that audit field work. So we will be conducting the audit, but in the next financial year. In the meantime, we have been involved in various other assignments and various other pieces of work that we've been able to support. That's mentioned within section 2.5 of the report. So that varies from fraud support in terms of the business grants work that's been ongoing, some whistleblowing referral work that we've been working on, supporting with reviews some of the policies that are on the agenda later this evening. And also some additional work that followed on from the last committee meeting where members requested some assurance around the coverage of procedures across the council services to support handover when we have a changeover in officers or if we have an absence, to make sure there's some documented procedures to enable controls to be continuously and consistently applied. So that's some work that we're continuing to progress and hope to bring back to you at the next meeting. There is a copy of the full audit plan in table 1 on page 5 of the appendix, and that sets out the status of each of the assignments. We have moved a number of those assignments on since the report was produced. And obviously there's a lot of work, particularly on the financial systems, that always takes place at this time of year, so that we can cover as much as we can of the financial year. So those are progressing nicely. We've also given you an update on the overdue audit recommendations. So there's an overview of those for you in the table 2 of the report. So it sets out the number of actions that have been implemented. And in the following table, there is then an update on all of those that have been overdue for more than 3 months with the latest status on those as well. So that's a quick run through of the report and the key sections, but I'm happy to take any questions members have on the content. Thank you.
Any questions, members? Councillor McCartney.
Thanks, Chair. There's several things that are overdue, and I understand why they're overdue. That's fine. One of the things is highways, where we've had a number of interim officers recently. Have we not got some sort of procedure or operations manual or something like that in place that gives us a bit more continuity between staff? So if we do have staff turnover, we can have a little bit more control over what's going on.
Through you,
Rachel,
Chair,
sorry.
I'll just respond to that. So in terms of the highways recommendations, I suppose it's I suppose it's the two issues here. So there's the procedures that support business as usual when we have a changeover in staff, but there's also the fact that when we have a new officer, particularly in that role, they were inheriting a lot of audit recommendations. So that's almost in addition to the day-to-day. So what we usually do is have a handover when a new officer starts in a role like that, and talk them through the overdue recommendations that they're inheriting, and support them with those. So we do have a procedure within internal audit to do that. So we try and engage with that. Whilst we do that, a number of the officers were interim, so they were only around for a short period of time. So once you've got one person up to speed and then they're dealing with it, I suppose you then have the changeover. In terms of the standard day-to-day work, that's part of what we're actually looking at the moment in terms of procedural coverage as well. So that's something that the committee did raise at the last meeting. So that's something that we are trying to get some assurance over. And I think some of the recommendations that we've made on the highways contract would actually provide that support and that guidance and procedure notes that would then inform work going forward. So hopefully once all of those are complete, that would provide the basis to just ensure that the contract just continues to be managed in the way we'd expect.
I understand we've got Andy, is it Andy Tat now heading up highways? Is he a permanent new member of staff, or is he an interim?
I can just refer to that. I think I don't know if management want to refer to that, but I as far as I'm aware, it's an interim, a temporary contract at the moment. I'm not sure whether it's 3 or 6 months. Someone else might be able to confirm.
Councillor Brown, do you want to add to that?
I believe it's 6 months and it's an interim at this stage.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks.
Anything else? Abigail? No. Councillor Powell, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just looking, obviously understand about the highways, and it's good to have that report and that assurance. Just looking through it though, there was obviously quite a lot of those actions go back quite a long time. And looking at the report, some of them where actually management said that they'd actioned the recommendations, when audit looked in a bit more detail, I don't think they had been properly actioned. So really, I suppose that's a question for all the internal audit areas in terms of, you obviously can't keep revisiting everything every time, but how do you actually check that what management have done and that they understand what needs to be done has actually been done?
Rachel, thank you.
So to refer to that, so obviously we have a standard follow-up process, which is what informs the committee reports that, like this evening with the tables 2 and 3, where for that we just ask for evidence to support the action. So if it's a high or a medium priority, we ask for some evidence to support that, and then we close the action. Where the report was of a limited assurance and we have concerns about the risks that were exposed to the council, we then do a full follow-up audit. So rather than just relying on one-off evidence, we then actually re-perform the testing, which is what we're doing with the highways contract. So rather we close the action at the time based on the evidence provided, but we then revisit it in full to make sure we're happy that the action has actually been effective in application.
So you would ask for evidence each time?
We do, yes, but obviously with some things they could show us that they've applied it once, but if it's something that we consider to be high risk, we'd want evidence that it's consistently applied, and that we can only really get if we re-perform the audit.
Okay, and I appreciate that all procedures at the moment aren't currently written up, and that's something obviously that's being worked on. So would that checking include making sure that those procedures are in place?
Sorry, Rachel.
Sorry, is that sorry? You're referring there to the highways, or is that the?
No, just in general. In general, when you're following up on audit recommendations.
Yeah. So if the recommendation is in relation to procedures, we'd ask for that's as an example. If that was the action, we'd ask for a copy of those procedures before we close the action.
But if it's not in relation to procedures, but if it's a recommendation, you would ask for some other evidence.
Yes.
and if you were sat, but that might not confirm something that was a bit more endemic. I appreciate you can't go back into everything every time, but I'm just trying to understand the extent to it that we get assurance that those recommendations have actually been properly actioned.
Yeah, exactly. So if it's, for example, if it's resulted in limited assurance, those are the actions that we're really interested in. So usually if we have a limited assurance, we will always do a full audit the following financial year, which is what we've been doing with the highways contract. And that's on that basis really, because whilst we've got assurance that the actions have been completed, we need to make sure that they are consistently applied and effective. Whereas if it was a low priority and it was only a reasonable level of assurance anyway, there may not be as much value in us reperforming the testing to look at those actions. So that's how we focus our audit follow-up, I suppose, but we're not able to reperform sample testing on every follow-up, so we need to try and target it in that way, and that's what we tend to do as an approach.
Okay, thank you. I think it was just a bit concerning as some of these the highways one went back, several years, and they were still not being actioned. I appreciate the reasons behind that, but just trying to understand the process across the board. Thank you.
Okay.
Do we have any further questions on the audit update, please? Councillor Rozelle.
Yeah, thank you. I think the question's for Rachel again. Rachel, I've just written down here competency, and that isn't really a criticism of individuals. It perhaps might be an observation on the organisation or on the way that objectives are written for officers. And I wonder, as part of the audit process, do we make recommendations that job descriptions and SMART objectives are reviewed to ensure that the officers are given every opportunity to be as good as we would want them to be, and I'm sure that they would want to be themselves? Is that part of the process as well?
Rachel, thank you.
I think it would depend on the nature of the audit, but certainly there are a high percentage of our audits where we do end up looking at job descriptions as one part of the testing, just to see what we actually expect and what level of experience we look for in that particular role, but also in terms of the specific roles and responsibilities, so that people are accountable for managing a specific contract, for example, or any of the other controls that we're expecting to see. So the job description certainly is something that we look at, and we do often make recommendations about strengthening those as well, about some of the requirements. So I don't know, does that answer?
I think, and a supplementary would be then that can you confirm that as a result of the work that you've done, that objectives for officers have been reviewed and that appropriate training has been given if needed?
But obviously that would be on a case-by-case basis. So I could comment on any particular audit. I'd be able to give you the response on that, but it would depend on which audit that was and what the issues were, I suppose, that we've raised.
That's good enough. Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions, please, before we move on? No? Thank you. Item 8 then is the internal audit plan, which Rachel's also going to introduce. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's back to me again. So the second report this evening is in relation to the new audit plan that we'll be working on from the 1st of April. So this is a plan. We brought a paper to the last committee that was kicking off this audit planning process, starting off some consultation with the committee and seeking your approval for the approach that I'd be following to develop your audit plan for the new year. So I just wanted to bring a bit of an update to the committee this evening, really, on some of the areas that are coming out of that process so far, and just to get a bit of a feel from committee members as well as to any of those areas that you feel we need to prioritise for coverage in the new financial year, so that I can feed that into what I'm now getting into is the risk assessment process and trying to prioritise. We obviously have to have a cut-off point because we can't audit everything, so I would just be interested if the committee had any strong views on anything that they considered poses a particular risk, or any areas they need a specific assurance about, whether it's on that list or if there are other areas that members wanted to raise as well. So I don't intend to go through the list, I'll take that as read, but I'm happy to comment on anything as to where those issues have arisen from, or take any questions on the proposed coverage.
Rachel, I've got one actually. In recent conversation, it's just come up, particularly in light of some big contracts that we've got coming up, is the contract management, and that's contract management in terms of ongoing management, not procurement. Looking at the delivery of contractual services and suppliers, value for money, compliance, performance, market testing, and performance against best practice. So that's to prepare us for the management of some big contracts we have in the future. I don't know if anybody else on the committee supports the inclusion of that in the audit plan. Councillor McCartney?
Seems sensible. Yeah, I think possibly also project management might be something that could be included, because we have got a number of big projects coming up. St George's is coming up and the various infrastructure works surrounding that. So it might be a good time to look at project management as well as contract management.
Councillor Brown? A. Brown?
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. Mine's the same sort of thing as Councillor McCartney. If we vote to accept the HIF money, then obviously that's going to put a bigger sort of strain on things. So is that going? Where will that fit in to here?
Well, there's on the. Sorry, Rachel. Do you want to answer that?
No.
Shall I carry on? There is one that says contract procedure rules and compliance, which is looking at the procurement of goods and services. Is that appropriate to answer that question with Rachel?
Is that where that goes?
So that's where we're looking at compliance with the contract procedure rules at various levels. So we select a sample of those and look at those in detail. Sorry, Chair, can I just
Yes,
just to a point of clarification on that. So you mentioned about contract management, which I completely agree, that's one of the biggest risk areas that we would need to look at. What we've done the approach that we've adopted in previous years is looking at focusing on specific contracts. So like we did the highways contract management audit, we've done waste contract, we've picked specific contracts and then done quite an in-depth contract management audit of that particular contract, rather than doing a general contract management audit, if that makes sense. So I just wondered if we could have a bit of a steer as to how you would want us to approach that. If it was a general contract management rather than specific contracts, would you want us to look at a small sample? I'm not sure what assurances you'd want from that.
Well, I was probably assuming that there is a contract management process that could be audited, but maybe that only exists for specific contracts. I don't know.
I don't know whether obviously it's something I can discuss with senior management team to how we could approach that. I'm just conscious that what we've tried to do is we have focused on those the council's highest risk, highest value contracts in the last few years. So I just want to make sure that we add value with that. So see how we could best approach that.
That's fine. I'll see what the rest of the committee have to say then. Or Councillor Brown, Gordon Brown.
Yeah, I'm just coming back to a point raised earlier about project management. Project management has been a feature of the Audit and Risk Committee for certainly the last 3 years I've been involved in it, and has done quite a bit of work. I don't know if there's anybody on the Audit and Risk that was there 2 or 3 years ago, apart from Sav, myself. And maybe Rachel can comment on it as well. I think that'd be useful to say just what we did do 2 and 3 years ago on contract management, and where we are today in that process. I think it's quite useful to understand that.
Rachel, thank you.
Yeah, I'm just happy to respond to that. So as Councillor Brown says, there was an updated piece of work on project management, I think 2 to 3 years ago now, which at the time we did some consultancy support on and had a review of that, which I think there was some specific reports that went to this committee around that time, and I think the relevant officer came along and did a presentation actually on the new framework, and we talked through that. Since then, what we have done is, for example, in this year's current audit plan, actually, actually, one of the things we wanted to do was get some assurance over how that project management framework's being applied in practice. So what we did was selected a project from the last 12 months, which for the purposes of this year, we looked at the SEN provision at Uppingham Community College. So that was intended to give some assurance to the committee over how that framework's being applied in practice, and the risk assessment process around that as well. So what we've done, again, similar to what I mentioned on contract management, really, is we've tried to look at some specific contracts and seen how effective that project management framework has been in supporting how those have been managed. I don't know if that helps answer that question.
Does that help, Councillor McCartney? Yeah, okay, thank you. Sav, you're next, please. You're on mute.
Yes, sorry, it's the queuing system, isn't it? Just two things. One, you know, I sort of echo what Rachel said. We've done a substantial amount of work on project management. We really have. And as somebody who sits on a number of project boards, the governance of projects is very much at the heart of how we're operating. What I would say to members is they must look closely at the reports that come to Cabinet. So, for example, we had a Cabinet report recently on the waste management project. That report was brought to Cabinet because it is a key part of the governance process, that we rated the importance of the project using our agreed project management methodology. And that said, that we had to come to Cabinet to approve the terms of reference and the various government initiation documents. So it's really important that members understand that reports that Cabinet take show that we live and breathe elements of project management, notwithstanding the work that Rachel does and the assurances that she can give. So there is lots of live evidence around the reports that we do. Those reports, in particular in waste, set out in the documents the point at which we will come to scrutiny or council. Again, key part of the governance of these projects. So, there's a lot. If members read all the reports that are produced, they will see that they'll be able to get assurance directly themselves of how we are putting into place, into practice, some of these things. In relation to projects generally, then I have no issue with us clearly picking out projects to look at project management and what we're doing. I think historically we've often picked on projects because members are uncomfortable with the projects or don't like them, rather than actually it's sort of about we're trying to look at the controls and processes around projects and manage. So I think as long as we're clear on what we're trying to get out of a project, i.e. is the methodology we've got in place and that has been agreed actually by this committee being applied in practice, that's the right focus for the project audit. In terms of contract management, then I do think, Rachel, it would be useful to note it as a potential area of focus. Certainly, I know that you guys through the pandemic have been looking at the contract registers and where we've been extending contracts and that sort of thing. So I do think it might be useful to maybe pick a different, some smaller contracts and look to see generally how managers manage those contracts across the council. Some contracts might require more detailed management than others, and it would be useful to understand the way in which individual managers approach that. I think the bit that we're really interested in, I would say, is do we know a sufficient amount about our suppliers? Given the pandemic and the risks our suppliers face, do we understand that? Do we know whether suppliers are coming under financial pressure themselves? Does that indicate there may be a risk to the successful delivery of the service that we've actually procured? So I am interested in terms of how managers get close enough to suppliers to understand their business and how it might impact on the goods and services that we've procured. So yeah, I'd be interested to pick a few out, Rachel, that we haven't looked at before, and look to see how managers try and put that into place, particularly during these times. I think given where we are with the pandemic and the pressure on businesses, we know from when we've extended contracts recently that we have come under price pressure. And that price pressure comes from both public sector bodies that we work with and actually a private business. So yeah, I'd certainly welcome some focus on contract management. In fact, I wouldn't use the word contract. I would extend that to some of our key partners as well, who, so for example, with Herefordshire, we have a delegated relationship with them, but it's still a relationship that we need to understand. So I'd maybe extend it beyond contracts to key partners like Peterborough for public protection, for example. You know, I am expecting a number of our public sector partners to tell me that they're delivering a fantastic deal for us and they want more fees in the future, just like I'm telling the partners we deliver for. So yeah, I think it'd be helpful to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sav. Councillor Powell, please.
Yeah, I was just on the contract management. I was going to agree, and I was going to say, but not quite so in so much detail, exactly what Mr. Della Rocca's just said in terms of picking some samples and just looking at the whole idea of the whole workings of some of those smaller contracts where, okay, the numbers might be smaller, but actually we might be at bigger risk. So yeah, I won't repeat that, but that actually Sav just mentioned that where we deliver contracts for other people as well. So I don't know if there's many of them, whether that's actually something we ever look at. That I'll just leave that as a question in terms of our income streams. The only thing I was going to say on the internal audit plan, it might be just useful to see against those items, when was the last time we looked at those areas? Because obviously with changing membership of the audit committee, we don't necessarily have that. Just the date that we last looked at, for example, the grant verification or whatever, or the procedure, just to give a bit of context. I know Councillor Brown mentioned obviously having an in-depth look at contracts 3 or 4 years ago, but just that might be helpful. The other thing I was going to ask, which probably is on this list, is development management. Could you just explain exactly what that is?
Rachel, thank you.
Yeah, so that's effectively the planning service. So that's where they're dealing with minor and major applications. So it's looking at the end-to-end process for that. So there are particular targets that are in place nationally in terms of the turnaround of those applications, and certain controls that we'd expect to be adhered to, and good use of systems such as a uniform system to make sure that that's an efficient process.
Okay, so that's planning development.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it wasn't clear from the description. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any more questions on the internal audit plan? No. The intention is to bring, sorry, Councillor McCartney, Councillor Roself afterwards.
Sorry, yeah, I've got one that Gail had submitted to me to read out, so I thought I ought to read that out. She has said, our annual school reviews a sensible use of resource at the moment. Now there is only one locally maintained school in Rutland. It's a particularly sensible use of resource when schools have not been fully functioning for much of the academic year. And when pupils do fully return, school staff will have additional burdens, both related to coronavirus and assessing, filling gaps in learning, etc. Should we not at least leave it a year and redirect the resource to more pressing matters? So that was from Councillor Waller.
Okay, Rachel, if you want to cover that off, but I'm assuming that in your risk assessment of the items that are on the plan, that would drop down to the bottom of the list in that case.
Yes, I can. I note the point, and it's something that I've been in discussions with the head of learning in relation to in the last few months, actually, in terms of this year's coverage as well. I would agree, but I would also say that I do always like to have some assurance, particularly around safeguarding in schools on a regular basis. So it's something that I'll speak to the head of learning about. It may be that we can do something quite scaled back, and something that I have discussed with the management team recently actually is whether we can do some support to help schools to do a self-assessment as well, so that we can almost give them the tools, and then governors can do their own assessment as and when it's convenient, rather than us coming in and taking up some of their time. And that's something that, whilst whilst we only have the very basic numbers of maintained schools left in Rutland, every year when I do the schools audits, I send the invitation out to any academies and independent schools as well. We do charge them a nominal fee to cover some of the costs, but it's trying to engage them and get some assurance over all of the schools where we could potentially be placing pupils across the county. So it does tend to be a wider piece of work. We've also used the days this year to help to work with some of our early years providers as well. So again, it's a slightly wider remit rather than just the 1 or 2 schools that we have left. But I note the point, and that will certainly feed into the risk assessment.
Thanks. I think from a personal point of view, I'm not entirely sure whether I agree with Gail or not on that one. I don't know whether the pressures surrounding homeschooling and coronavirus and the fact that pupils haven't been at school in person for so long makes it more or less important to follow up and audit these things. But yeah, I don't know.
And I think some of the risks that we look at around things like risk assessments in schools possibly may be more relevant now than in previous years. So again, it's something that I'll discuss with management and see whether there's some assurance that we need to get there, and if so, how we do that by the best means.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Councillor Rozelle.
Yeah, thank you. It was a question really around the COVID-19 recovery as a topic. I think I recall question that we also talked about our business continuity plan around COVID-19, and I'd argue, quite frankly, that it's a thing to be celebrated. The way that the council officers have responded to the pandemic. I just wonder whether there's space within that topic to audit our business continuity plan and demonstrate the success, and that's preempting it. I don't want to do that, but challenging the business continuity plan as part of that COVID-19 recovery.
Rachel, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I'm happy to comment on that. So firstly, yes, some of that could feed into the scope of the audit. So we'd be looking at the council's response and any lessons learned. So certainly business continuity would form a part of that. But I would also, and I know Sav's put his hand up, but I know that at the last meeting, Sav did mention that there had been a review by the Local Resilience Partnership. And I believe that would have looked very closely at the business continuity particularly. So it might be that we would be duplicating some of that work if we went into any further, but I'm sure Sav can comment on that if that's what he's put his hand up for as well.
Would you like to go ahead?
Yes, yeah, that's right, Rachel. The Resilience Forum did do a review of our business continuity arrangements, and we have work to do to improve, guess what, our procedures and what we write down. So despite the fact that we responded very well to the pandemic, there's still improvements we have to make to documentation. Which is very frustrating, but nevertheless, it's part of that continuous improvement journey. So, yeah, there is work to do, and the Resilience Forum are going to help us do that. But the interesting thing for me is, one of the things that recently we've been focusing on is cyber attacks. Cyber attacks are very different to pandemic issues and require quite a different type of response. And so trying to produce a set of procedures that cover the different scenarios is immensely difficult, really. But there is more work to do in terms of our documentation. I say that because that's what that is the reality of it.
Thank you.
Is that it, Ian? Councillor Rozelle finished?
Yes, sorry, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thanks. Councillor McCartney.
Thanks, Chair. Just one last one. I just see Appendix A here is risk management. I wonder whether we ought to look at risks. I know there's a lot of work already done about risks associated with HIF, assuming we accept it. Is that something that ought to be brought in front of this?
We'll get to that. Should we discuss it under item 10 on the agenda, under risk management?
Oh, sure, yeah, sorry, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions on the internal audit plan? No? So the final version of the plan is due to come back to committee in April. In the interim, we have 2 recommendations. The first recommendation is that members note the initial areas highlighted for potential coverage in the audit plan and advise on any areas which the committee would prioritise for coverage in the plan, which I think we have done with contract management. And the second recommendation is that members approve delegation to the Strategic Director for Resources in consultation with the Chair of Audit and Risk Committee to approve an interim 2021-22 internal audit plan, which is what we've seen tonight, ahead of formal approval by the committee in April 2021. Can we take a vote, please, Emma?
Yeah, so if I just go through the names, so Councillor Brown,
Approve.
Councillor McCartney,
For.
Councillor Powell,
Approve.
Councillor Razil,
Approve.
and Councillor Payne.
Approve.
Okay, that's unanimous.
Thank you. Okay, item 9 brings us on to the external audit letter, and John Gregory's here from Grant Thornton to give us an update. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good evening, everybody. So those of you who've been on the audit committee for a while will recognise that the annual audit letter is a routine part of the annual cycle, and you will probably have heard me say in previous years that it's a bit strange because much of the content of the annual audit letter you have already seen before, because it duplicates what we brought in the audit findings report back in November. Reason for that being that auditing standards require us to bring a report to you summarising our audit findings before I actually sign the opinion. Whereas the specific legislation that we operate under also requires us to produce an annual audit letter after I have given the opinion. So essentially you end up with 2 bites at the cherry with only minimal differences between them. So all I was going to do this evening was just point out really what the differences are. The annual audit letter, I have to say, is a slightly shorter document. It doesn't have to have quite the same bells and whistles within it as the audit findings report. But I mean, essentially, the good news is that we were able to sign the unqualified opinion on the 18th of December. There was a short delay later than we were anticipating signing, which was because we ran into some issues in terms of the audit of the pension fund at the county council. Which actually led to delays in the sign-off of all the various authorities across the whole county. But nevertheless, we were still able to get things sorted so that your opinion was given the right side of Christmas. As we've noted in the document, as expected, we included an emphasis of matter in our opinion, which is not a qualification. It's simply drawing the reader of the accounts attention to a particular statement in the accounts. That statement being the bit that talks about the uncertainty over the value of land and buildings valuations and of the valuations of the assets held by the pension fund. The document goes through the various significant risks that we identified. No difference there really to what was in the audit findings report. Talks about the value for money conclusion. I think the only other thing that I do need to point out to you is the appendix around fees. So just to remind you on where we got to with fees before. So there is a scale fee for your audit as prescribed originally by Public Sector Audit Appointments Limited. So that scale fee was 50,420. We agreed with you at the start of the audit that there were certain areas that were going to lead us to have to do more work anyway, which were very similar to the areas that we had to charge more for in the previous year. So that was an additional, I'm just doing the maths in my head, £6,000. And then I can't honestly remember whether we talked about this at the last audit committee or not. But we have since then agreed with SAV that we would charge an additional fee as well for the huge amount of additional time that audits everywhere have taken us as a result of COVID. Not something I'm particularly comfortable having to do, but the fact is that COVID and auditing in a remote environment, as well as some of the other sort of difficulties that being in a pandemic has brought us, has actually led us to take about 40 to 50% longer to do all of our audits this time. So what we've asked all our authorities to do is to make a contribution towards those increased costs in the form of a one-off 15% increase in the fee. So nowhere near covering the full amount, and we thought it was the right thing to do, that we still bear a significant sort of part of that additional cost ourselves in the environment we're in. So that's where that 8,463 comes from, and gives the overall fee for the year of 64,883. The good news is that we did manage to keep that figure down to just below the fee figure that it was before the last round of reductions which PSAA put through. So you're no worse off than you were in 2017-18. Let's put it like that. So that is basically the annual audit letter. Quite happy to take any comments or questions on that. I know if I don't answer it now that I will get a question on anyway, so I'll answer it now, which is around the closing of the accounts and dealing with the objections. And I know that I earnestly promised you that I would have got it all sorted by the time of this meeting. I am very nearly there. I have been working on the response to the objection over the past couple of weeks, when I have been able to, hoping to get that drafted by the end of this week. It then has to be reviewed by PSAA, and then we'll go out, and then as soon as I have done that, we will be able to certify completion of both years' audits. And I have to say, the objector is being very understanding about the situation, and there is no kind of harm to yourselves arising from the delay. I know you want it sorted, and for that matter, I want it sorted as well. I want it off my plate. But yeah, there are many calls on everybody's time at the moment, as I'm sure you'll appreciate. So, any comments or questions?
Councillor Powell, please.
No, thank you, John. Just following up on the fees, and perhaps a bit of a cheeky question, really. Obviously, the current financial year has been all under COVID, and I appreciate things will have taken you longer from the audit point of view. I guess just because of availability of documentation, I mean, all sorts of reasons. I totally appreciate that. But are the things that have gone quicker, are the things you've learned? Are you expecting, one would hope that, you know, things will be changing in terms of how audits are done anyway, and that actually there's a bit of a gearing up to be able to do that without so much extra time for this financial year and going forward?
Yeah, I mean, the key thing obviously isn't particularly the financial year to which our work relates. It's the when we're actually doing it. So, you know, we were doing your final accounts audit this time, sort of over the summer and into the autumn. So, you know, during sort of full COVID for that period. I mean, what I'm sincerely hoping is that things will have started at least to. Sorry, I'm trying to avoid sounding like Boris now. Things will have at least started to get more back to normal by the time we are doing the final accounts audit this time, sort of this summer and into the autumn. So I'm hoping for that reason it won't take us that much longer anyway. But to come back to your original point, yes, we have learned things. We have one of the biggest difficulties that we had, and which has undoubtedly led to us taking longer time, is just the difficulty of supporting and coaching our teams when everybody is sort of dispersed. And one of the things that we have now learned to do is something that we're calling a virtual audit room, which is basically that the team that's working on a particular audit on a particular day, they just log on to a Teams call at the start of the day, stay logged on to that call the whole day, and then they can just talk as if they were in the same room throughout the day. And that is actually it's having sort of double benefit, because it is being more efficient and it is beneficial for those individuals, because they feel a lot less isolated. So yeah, there is a lot of learning that we've done, and obviously it's inevitably starting us questioning why we spend, particularly people like myself, why we spend half our lives driving around the country as well to go to meetings when we don't actually have to. So yeah, there is a lot of learning going on, as I think there probably is for all of society, really.
Have there been any, sorry, can I ask a supplementary?
Carry on.
Have there been any specific recommendations you've made to Rutland County Council in terms of the way the audit is conducted from their perspective that would improve that efficiency, so that we shouldn't expect to see extra fees next year?
I don't think there's anything in the discussions we've had with Rutland on the back of this audit which is specifically about the remote working. I mean, we have been having some discussions about making things work in a more streamlined manner, particularly around making sure that we get sort of properly cleansed, what we refer to as cleansed populations of transactions to audit. So, if you've got a list that purports to be the council's total expenditure, hopefully it's all expenditure and it's not a complete mishmash of expenditure around income items and things like that, because that sort of unscrambling, uncleansed information like that is something that potentially we can spend a lot of time doing. So, and we're always having discussions about making things more straightforward from that sort of point of view.
Okay, so hopefully we shouldn't expect that extras on the fees again next year then?
No, certainly nothing like on that scale.
Yeah, we all heard it. Sav, is there anything you want to come back with on Don's report?
No, not on the report, but obviously, for context, I mean, the fact that audit fees have had to go up a little bit is no surprise to me. I do remember the days when our audit fee was over £140,000. And of course, local authorities like ours say we're under financial pressure. We don't want to pay big audit fees like this. The commission was then abolished and all the audit firms were put under pressure to deliver audits at less cost. And in my opinion, and it is just an opinion, it went too far. And so, in fact, that has been acknowledged through the additional work that the auditors now have to do, where, so this is not a surprise, but what I would say is let's look at the big picture here, where our audit fee was 140 grand, about 6 or 7 years ago. It's now less than half of that. It's a phenomenal reduction. You can't simply expect the same level of work and the same level, I'm not going to say assurance, because the scope of the work is slightly different, but it's not a surprise. So, I think we do have quite a lean and mean audit fee for what we get. So
not so much of the mean, if you don't mind.
Mean. You're probably right, John.
Thank you. That report was just for noting, but I'd like to also say that Rosemary and I've attended some kit for briefings lately where Rutland has been in quite a good place as far as the auditing situation is concerned. So many thanks to Sav's team and also to the external auditors.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next item is item 10, the risk register. Sav, I think you're going to introduce this one.
Yeah, but yes, Chair, I won't say too much actually. Last time at the last committee, I said we hadn't updated the risk register. We have spent quite a considerable time updating it. Appendix A summarises the fact there's been quite a number of updates. I mean, what I've tried to do for the committee is not lose sight of previous actions. So I've changed the risk register to include sections against each risk about what's happened with actions we had previously and whether they've been implemented or not. I've now got my little arrows that on each of the risk scores that show whether risks go up or down, and I've highlighted in the document risks that are new. So I think the first appendix summarises it's the dashboard, if that's the right expression, that summarises the movements, and obviously the detail is there in relation to the individual risks. And obviously just a sort of reminder that the role of this committee is to ensure that we have risk management arrangements in place. It's not the role of this committee to determine whether risks are being sufficiently managed in one sense. I mean, clearly the policies that Council and Cabinet put in place determine to a large degree how we deal with particular risks. And then obviously the responsibilities that statutory officers like myself have, you know, I'm responsible for putting in place arrangements over my areas. Of course, that's why Rachel audits them. But yeah, but what this committee is about is, you know, have we got risk management arrangements in place? And I would say clearly we've got a risk register, we've got a policy. You know, we are, admittedly, we hadn't updated it because of the pandemic, but you know, it is a living document. So anyway, happy to take any questions or comments that the committee have.
No questions?
Oh, lovely.
Councillor Andrew Brown, please.
Absolutely, yeah, I got in just in time there, didn't I?
Just in time, yeah.
I, for reasons best known to me, did some SIPFord training, and there's this thing called risk clustering, which I thought was quite interesting, where you look for similarities in risks and project areas, and identify if the same group of people are involved, and then you can look for sort of common actions and stop duplication of effort, and allocate resource more efficiently. Is that something that we do? Risk clustering.
Not at this level. Well, no, yeah, I think obviously this is a strategic risk register that covers the whole gamut of council services and the offer. So the commonality between different risks is a little bit less than it would be in a specific service area. If you ask me, for example, in the area of housing benefits and council tax, are risk clustered? Are the same risk covered by different sets of controls and processes? Yes, they absolutely are. But in areas that are very distinct, as we have on the strategic risk register, I think that will be less easy to see, unless a lot of the risks are common. But yeah, certainly in individual service areas, you'll have procedures or processes or controls that do cover a multitude of risks. So yes, that does happen.
Okay. Councillor McCartney.
Yeah, just bringing back the thing I mentioned about risk management earlier, but I mentioned whether we ought to be looking at the risks associated with HIF and so on, but I've just taken on board Saf's comments then that the committee is here for determining that we have procedures in place and not necessarily which risks we ought to be looking at. So I think we've probably answered that question then.
Okay.
I mean, what I would say on that is if you felt that there was a major risk we've omitted from the register, you may question whether our arrangements are valid, and that is a valid question. So, but you know, so
I maintain a risk register at work as well. It's just part of the massive ISO paperwork pile that is all is just fun and games, and isn't it? Yeah,
Well, it really is.
I've got arrows as well, Sav. I've got red, green. I've got traffic light arrows, and things move up and down the register.
You'll know, and can I ask you a question? I know this is not supposed to be a dialogue like this, but you'll know that a lot of it doesn't help you manage risk any better, does it? Sometimes.
No, not really. No, that is true. Yeah.
Well, it's very interesting for you to say that as somebody who does that in your working environment, because I get beaten up when the risk register is not up to date. You see.
Yeah.
But anyway,
mine's not up to date. I mean, it doesn't.
Oh dear.
It doesn't get up to date. Well,
send
it's
Rachel
been
into
updated for Brexit, and it got updated for coronavirus, but it hasn't been updated since September last year. I wouldn't think so.
Okay, any more on the risk register? Councillor Rizal.
Sav, I'm going to ask you to have a really kind of long look into the future here. So I noticed under Risk ID 100, there's that question around COVID-19, and it's the perennial concern that, well, maybe it's factual, but there will continue to be spikes. And do you think that the risk register that we've got, do you think we, as best we can, understand impact over the next 2 to 3 years?
No, I don't think we do understand it. I think we have concerns about certain areas. We have concerns that there might be longer term impacts, but to say that we properly understand it, I don't think would be right. I think there's areas we know what to look out for, but to say we understand the impacts at this stage would be too early to say. And I think that's reflected in the way the risk is worded. Sorry, I can't look at people and look at the documents at the same time, but I think
I agree with you.
I think the way the risk is worded is a real honest assessment to say we are worried about certain things that might emerge, but to say that we have any clarity about how that will look is far too early to say. And the worst thing about that from my point of view as a finance officer is I don't know what the financial impact of that is going to be either, and whether actually we can cope with it within the funding envelope that we've got. You know, if we really did see an increase of 10% of mental health cases where, you know, individuals need support, that might have a really big financial impact. So, yeah, I don't know. I think we've done the best we can. I think we're right to register it on the, to log it on the risk register, and we're right to keep a lookout for certain variables. But I just don't know at the moment.
No, that's great. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Any more for Sav on the risk register? I think we're done on that. Shall we move on to item 11 then, which is the counter fraud and corruption policy? And Sav's going to introduce this as well, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So we have a counter fraud and corruption policy that sits across our sort of fraud framework, anti-fraud framework. And we do have a fraud risk register that sits below that, where we identify what the common fraud risk is, and that is a risk register that we haven't updated. I think I said that last time, and it hasn't still been updated. But the fraud risks tend not to change. Actually, relative to the strategic risk register, the typical fraud risk tends to stay broadly the same. We periodically review the counter fraud policy. Rachel did it last time for us, did a really comprehensive review last time for us, looking at best practice and looking at work done at our other clients. We've refreshed the policy this time. There were no substantive changes. We again had a look at best practice documents to see whether there's anything we need to scale up or down, as it were. But you know, the changes have been relatively they are administrative. So no fundamental change, but nevertheless, it's important that we do look at the the counter fraud policy and make sure it's up to date. One of the sort of subsidiary, if that's the right protocols that we've got, is around money laundering. And whilst we're not, whilst we don't need to formally have a protocol in place, we do have a procedure. Just to make sure that we aren't the victims of money laundering. We've had concerns once or twice in the past, which we have reported nationally. But again, we've made some minor changes to that protocol. But you know, happy to take any questions. I mean, I think just a final point to say. Normally, the fraud policy would go to Cabinet or Council for approval, but given that the changes are administrative only, then once we have sort of noted it, we can actually launch. It doesn't need that formal sign off. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Any questions, please? I can't see any hands. No latecomers. So that was just to note the updated counter fraud and corruption policy in Appendix A, and the anti-money laundering procedures had been updated as well. So there's no vote required on that. So we'll move on to item 12, which is a verbal update on the statement of accounts, again from Sav.
Yes, Chair. I've given Andrew the night off. So in fact, I've given him the week off. That's how generous an employer I am, I think. So I've given, so he's done me a note, and which I will update you on. So various things. Firstly, the timetable for the accounts. I think there is debate. There is a consultation exercise being done at the moment, actually, as to whether the published accounts date may be extended from July to September. But we're sort of ignoring that because we want to get our accounts certainly published in draft by the end of May. So we want to work to the old timetable. The team are ready to go on it. So we want to achieve that end of May. In terms of changes from 1920, no major changes in terms of accounting requirements. I think as mentioned tonight, and CIPFA have mentioned this as well, there will be a greater focus on assumptions where we are using estimates. And for us, this will be around pensions and asset valuations. So we'll have to evidence the assumptions that we're making. Not unusual, but there's a bit more focus around that. In terms of key risks, then resources is always a risk. Obviously, we have COVID is still here. We're still doing umpteen financial returns to government every couple of weeks. And we do have a relatively small team. So if we lost resources, then of course that would cause pressure. We have partially mitigated that risk. There you go, risk management in action here. We've brought in some temporary resource to support us. And that person is actually leading the accounts process under Andrew, and that has allowed him to do the work that he needs to do on the pandemic and other matters. So that is temporary support during the pandemic only. And obviously, if we do run into problems, we will have the opportunity to extend that. I would rather not, but clearly, if the financial reporting requirements related to the pandemic continue, we might have to look at that. The second key risk is around pensions. Pensions reporting, where we're relying on actuaries to produce information in a timely manner. And obviously we want to produce the accounts by the end of May, as I said. So we've already commenced discussions with the pension fund to make sure that they can fit in with our timetables. And then third, and probably the biggest area of risk in one sense, is around asset valuations, particularly the impact of COVID and Brexit on asset valuations. So we do have a normal rolling program where we get a certain percentage of assets externally valued, and that's completed by our valuers Bruton Knowles. They also help facilitate an impairment review. So we look across the whole portfolio, and using the knowledge and information they have, we will look at whether we might impair some assets, and those assumptions, clearly where that is the case, we do need to document those. So asset valuations is another risk, but we've already working with Bruton Knowles to a timetable that again will help us meet our requirements. And it'll be interesting to see what the impact on Brexit or COVID has been on the assets that we are going to get valued. So those are the sort of key issues. So I'm not worried about the final accounts. We're normally very good at meeting the timetable we set ourselves. We've brought in some additional resource to mitigate the pandemic workload and that risk, and I'm confident we'll achieve the March deadline. The May deadline that we've set ourselves. So I'd like to achieve March, but that's but yeah, so I'm quite confident that we'll be okay. And history tells me that unless something drastic happens, we should be. But obviously happy to take any questions.
John, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to add something to what Sav said, he mentioned about estimates and the new emphasis on estimates this year, which comes about as a result of the adoption of a new version of auditing standard 540. I mean, one of the key things in that is that there is a clear expectation that you, as those charged with governance, will have a better understanding of the nature of the estimates that appear in your accounts, why they are as they are, and sort of what alternative estimates and processes might have been considered to arrive at that place. So, you know, I think that is something that you do need to bear in mind going forward. I mean, it's not that we're expecting you to suddenly become well versed in the dark arts of valuing pension fund liabilities as the actuaries do, or anything like that. But the expectation is that you will understand more about it, understand what are the key drivers that lead to the estimates coming out the way they are, and what could make them change significantly. Whereas in the past, the emphasis has been more on officers understanding that, and certainly the auditors challenging officers on that. It's the expectation now is that we will be able to have an intelligent discussion in this committee about such things. Just thought I'd throw that in. And can I just say, I didn't write the new auditing standard, so don't blame me.
We look forward to the exciting debates ahead.
Indeed.
Right, thank you, Sav, for that item. Then item 13 is the Redmond review, and Sav, I've got you down for this as well.
Have you?
I have.
Yes, well, I just I know, Chair, that I know that you've been at various seminars and things like that where the Redmond review has cropped up, and I know that you sent an email out previously to the committee highlighting various bits and bobs.
Yeah.
So really, I mean, obviously the government has responded to the Redmond review. It's made various comments and suggestions about maybe having independent members on our audit committees, whether the auditors might report into council, various changes to the annual governance statement, a raft of different things. Certainly nothing, I mean, it's still a work in progress in terms of the government actually formally responding and actually implementing any changes. So we're a way off that. But one of the things that I thought was quite interesting that I wanted to mention was the possibility of the external auditor actually coming to council to present their audit findings, particularly with the emphasis on, financial resilience. I thought that would be something quite important. I think clearly the auditors will be doing work in that arena. And I think reporting to council about, so they can hear direct from the auditor rather than through me or through this committee, what the auditor is saying, if there might be key recommendations around what actions we need to take. And I thought that was interesting and certainly something I would welcome. As the Section 151 officer, my job is to, obviously, as the council's chief financial advisor, is give the advice that I think is appropriate. But one of the checks and balances on me, if that's the right expression, is the work that the auditors do as well. So, I thought out of all of the things that I've seen from Redmond, that is something that we could ask John to do as part of his remit, and certainly I would be supportive of it. That's probably the key thing I wanted to mention, Chair. But if other members have read around the topics, then this is an opportunity for us to discuss any emerging issues that people might want to from Redmond. Obviously, with John here as well, he may have his own views on certain things that the committee may want to tap into.
To be quite honest, I sent the note out after Rosemary and I had attended that last briefing, but to be honest, not a lot moved very far from the previous discussion that we'd had. John, I don't know if you've got anything you want to add to what Sav's just said.
I think Sav's already mentioned that the government has published its response, and in its response it kind of is a little bit lukewarm. It kind of said, well, there's a lot here that we agree with, but at the same time it seems quite resistant, and I can understand why, to the idea of setting up this new regulatory body, which is recommended by Redmond. The government hasn't said no, that's not going to happen, but it said it wants to think more about that, and that would actually have quite a big impact on us and the work we do, because it would take us out of the existing regulatory regime where we basically have to do whatever the Financial Reporting Council wants us to do, and the Financial Reporting Council has a very strong emphasis on valuation of PPE and other areas within the accounts where there is a high degree of estimation uncertainty, and we're not sure that actually worrying about the valuation of PPE is where we should be spending as much time as we are doing, when what actually matters to local residents is more kind of how you're spending your council tax money, and therefore revenue and capital expenditure. So we were hoping that under the new regulator we might get to change emphasis back to where we think it should be. I mean, I think it is interesting that a number of the Redmond recommendations are things that we can all just get on and do anyway. And the one that Sav's just mentioned about us coming to talk to full council, no reason why that can't happen. You don't need legislation to do that. We can just do that. And there are plenty others that are the same. I mean, obviously the one about independent members on audit committees, and when we say independent in that context, we're not talking about non-political councillors, we're talking about non-councillors on audit committees. Lots of authorities already do that. There's no reason why it shouldn't be more widely recognised as good practice, and people just get on and do it. But yeah, there's a whole range of different things there. Obviously it talks about audit fees and the fact that because of the very low fee levels, the way the sort of market is operating for external audits is broken, basically. With no new entrants to the market wanting to come forward, and you end up with a situation where we in Grant Thornton have got 40% of the audits. EY I think have got 25, Mazars have got 15, and very few other people have got any at all, and that's just not a healthy place to be. It's quite nice for us having 40% of the market in some ways, but it's just not a healthy market.
Okay. Anybody got any questions for John or Sav on the Redmond review? No? No, that's great. Okay, thank you. That brings us to the end of the agenda then. And just to thank you all for attending the meeting. And I will close the meeting then at 2016. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.